Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit wild. We are going to build a bridge between two completely, and I mean completely different worlds. On one hand, we've got the loud, visceral, fiercely political world of mid-century Italian cinema and critique, and on the other, the quiet, agonizing, almost totally invisible isolation of an early 20th century Portuguese bookkeeper. Now, at first glance, these two would probably have a totally miserable time at a dinner party together. It sounds like a really impossible combination, right? But stick with me, because by bringing them together, we're going to uncover a truly profound perspective on what modern life actually does to the human spirit.
So let's actually meet this odd couple. First up, we have Fernando Pessoa. He's this brilliant Portuguese writer, really the ultimate chronicler of inward fatigue. He famously wrote that, "Literature is a confession that life is not enough." Kind of breaks your heart, doesn't it? Then, on the flip side, we have Pier Paolo Pasolini, the incredibly provocative, scandalous Italian filmmaker and intellectual who proudly declared, "To scandalize is a right. To be scandalized is a pleasure."
You're probably wondering why on earth we'd put these two together, right? The absolute paradox between them is what's so striking here. Pasolini is all about outward focus. His work is just this loud collision of physical bodies, class struggle, public polemics, and the aggressive violence of modern consumer society. But Pessoa, specifically through his semi-heteronym Bernardo Suarez in the Book of Disquiet, he's entirely inward. His whole world is crushing fatigue, repetitive office routines, a totally fragmented consciousness, and just this deep metaphysical unease. But here's the thing. Applying Pasolini's aggressive, outward critique to Pessoa's deeply private notebook exposes the hidden, silent violence of our own daily routines. It shows us that modern civilization doesn't just change our politics, it literally changes our souls.
To really unpack this, we need a framework. So we're going to take 6 of Pasolini's core critical strategies and map them directly onto Pessoa's quiet world. It's absolutely fascinating to see how this translates. We'll look at how material marginality becomes a sort of urban invisibility, how a loud bourgeois critique shifts into this quiet bourgeois emptiness. We'll see how the sacred transforms into a spiritual wound, how linguistic contamination turns into formal instability, and how public shock becomes this devastating inward disintegration. And finally, we'll explore how the nostalgia for a truly authentic life morphs into a tragic state of alienated delay.
Let's kick things off with Section 1, a fragmented modern self. Before we dive into those 6 strategies, we really have to understand the vessel for all of this, which is Pessoa's The Book of Disquiet. The narrator, Bernardo Suarez, is an assistant bookkeeper in Lisbon. But this book isn't some straightforward diary. It's a completely scattered constellation of fragments. And scholars agree this is no accident. Luciana Paiva Coronel notes that this prose-poetic fragmentation perfectly mirrors modern conflict. Diego Gimenez roots it right in the gritty materiality of modern urban life. But it's Karen Adorno who really hits the nail on the head for us here. Suarez's profound boredom isn't just some personal quirk or laziness. It is a symptom of modernity itself. This book isn't just a diary, it's a civilization-wide diagnosis wrapped up as a tired office worker's journal.
Moving into our second section, the physical drain, marginality, and the bourgeois.
Let's start our descent by looking at how modern routine physically drains us, basically turning us into ghosts in our own cities. Just listen to this remarkable thought from Fragment 148. Pessoa writes, "I unroll myself into periods and paragraphs because ordinary life has failed to provide a sufficient site of presence." Wow. What this tells us is that Suarez is a social miner. In Pasolini's world, the marginalized are these highly visible outcasts, the poor, the scandalous. But Pessoa adapts this. Suarez isn't scandalous at all. He's just invisible. He is gently, quietly reduced to absolute insignificance by administrative routine. He literally has to write himself into existence because his actual, physical, social life is just too thin to hold him. And this overwhelming feeling of invisibility drips right into our next concept, bourgeois emptiness. In Fragment 270, Pessoa describes sitting in a modern-style room, deserted even by itself, where boredom becomes discomfort, physical sorrow. Notice how modern space has become completely estranged from human habitation. Bourgeois existence here isn't full of the hidden, scandalous hypocrisy you'd see in a Pasolini film. No, it's just completely affectively hollowed out. It's a spiritually draining atmosphere.
Which brings us to this incredibly fascinating concept, the metaphysics of routine. Basically, this is the process where repetitive, ordinary life seeps into your very soul. It converts time into this dull, heavy pressure, producing a kind of metaphysical nausea. You know, that deep, sickening feeling that your life is just a series of repetitive gears turning? That's it. Scholars like Pilates and Cislin have analyzed Pasolini's critique of consumer society as a sort of new fascism that standardizes our desires. Well, Pessoa is showing us exactly what that flattening feels like from the inside. Modern domination doesn't always look like overt brutality. Sometimes it just looks like a soft, quiet devastation of the spirit while you're sitting alone in a rented room.
Let's go a bit deeper into Section 3, the spiritual void, the sacred, and language. So, what actually happens when a society loses its connection to the sacred? Pasolini was deeply attached to the sacred. He saw it as this vital realm of human depth and ritual. Pessoa, on the other hand, feels its absence like a phantom limb. He writes, "I was born in a time when most young people had lost belief in God, without knowing why, and chose humanity as a substitute." Suarez doesn't celebrate this modern secularism as some great emancipation. For him, the loss of transcendence is a lingering, chronic ache. Just swapping in humanity for God is a cheap bandage for metaphysical dissatisfaction that a modern administrative life simply cannot cure.
And think about how powerful this is as a form of resistance. Francesca Capel points out that for Pasolini, the sacred pushes back against neocapitalism. Meanwhile, Antonio Girildo Cantarella notes that in Pessoa, this loss of the divine creates a really restless, splintered style of writing. And Paulo de Quille shows us how Pasolini used essayistic impurity, mixing high art and low street language, to resist polished, fake bourgeois discourse. The point here is that because modern consciousness is so fractured by this spiritual absence, it completely splinters the way they actually write and communicate. Nothing captures this fracture better than Pessoa's haunting image of the boneco de cerradura, or the sawdust puppet. Suarez describes himself as this puppet, whose momentary consciousness produces only a faint ringing, a tinkling life of the dead. By mixing the living and the dead, the puppet and the prose, Pessoa is actively messing with his own format. He is outright refusing to play along with the fantasy that a modern, fragmented subject can be neatly packaged into a seamless, unified, socially acceptable language. Now we arrive at our final layers in Section 4, the psychological terror, provocation, and nostalgia. Pasolini famously provoked his audiences through shocking, highly visceral imagery on screen. Pessoa's provocation is much, much quieter. But man, is it surgically violent. In Fragment 327, he writes, "The exhaustion of all illusions, the intellectual shame of having had them, knowing they would end this way. This is literally an inescapable tribunal of the mind." Suarez isn't just disappointed with his life. He anticipates and critiques his own disappointment before it even happens. Consciousness itself becomes an absolute trap. What we're looking at here is provocation without the spectacle. While Pasolini scandalized the physical body to expose external power dynamics, Pessoa scandalizes human consciousness itself to expose modern emptiness. He completely destroys that comforting bourgeois fantasy we all have that our inner life is a safe, stable sanctuary from the world. Instead, he turns the interior mind into a site of decomposition. And that leads us to a deeply shared mourning for authenticity. But they experience it differently. While Pasolini mourned the destruction of communal, embodied life by consumerism, Pessoa's nostalgia is intensely personal. He mourns the inability to actually inhabit his own life. Modernity has forced him into being a mere spectator of his own existence, perpetually trapped in the state of alienated delay, where actually being present is constantly slipping into mere observation. So, what does this all mean? Let's look at the anatomy of modern loss. By reading The Quiet Portuguese Bookkeeper through the lens of the loud Italian polemicist, we get this unified theory of what modern civilization does to us. And I really want to linger on this devastating quote from Fragment 148. Suarez writes, "I can say, with that truth which has no literature, that there was no tragedy in my life. What there was something gray, useless, and dispersed." I mean, that tells us everything, doesn't it? Modernity's deepest damage isn't usually some grand, spectacular catastrophe. It is a slow, gray, attritional erosion of our presence. It teaches us how to mistake mere survival for actual living. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a provocative question to really chew on. If the most decisive forms of violence against our authenticity are quiet, mundane, and routine, what parts of your own life are slowly slipping into gray dispersion? Are you truly inhabiting your life right now, or are you just observing it from the side door of a modern-style room? Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating intersection of ideas with me.